franchise. I'm Charean Williams, and this is Rick Goslin, and we are Dallas-Fort Worth Pro Football Hall of Fame voters, and we're proud to be joined today, it's a very special day, by Daryl Moose Johnston. Cowboys fans will remember him as Emmitt Smith's favorite blocker from the fullback position, now with Fox, and also GM of the Alliance of American Football, and we'll talk more about that. But first, let's start with the Cowboys game on Sunday. I know that wasn't your game, Moose, but how much concern is there about this Cowboys football team right now?
Well, I think there's always an overreaction. So I don't know what people thought going into that game. I think you look at the NFC South and that you've got three teams there. At the beginning of the season was Carolina, Atlanta, and New Orleans that a lot of people had as some of the top teams in the NFC. So did you really expect Dallas to go down and knock off Carolina at home in the Week 1 opener? So that's a tough, yeah, exactly. It's a tough way to start the season. But there were some issues during the course of the game that I think you can have some concern about. I think one of the big things for me was watching that defense, who I have high expectations for, struggle with just the simple zone read and the play action that came off that. If you're going to play Cam Newton, you have to have your rules down and understand that. And there were too many times where we saw breakdowns in assignments that allowed some big runs. And then shortly after that, they got into the play action off of that. They struggled with Christian McCaffrey a little bit in the beginning of the game. So I think there were some things fundamentally that you wanted to see a little bit better. They tackled poorly. Both sides of the ball had penalties that put them in awkward positions. You can't win football games if you're beating yourself, especially a team in Dallas' situation where they're transitioning out of some veteran players. So you expect growing pains, but there are certain things fundamentally that you would have liked to have seen perform better in Week 1.
Joe, offensively, the Cowboys are completely out of sync. Prescott was not on his A game. I go back to the preseason where they didn't play much. When you guys were in camp and winning Super Bowls, how much did you play in the preseason games compared to what's going on now?
I've been very outspoken about what the CBA has done to the game of football. I understand the health and safety concerns. I understand being able to prolong careers, and what we did in training camp was not the right thing to do. But you know, there was an area in there where I think it's beneficial for the players, for the organization, for the league, and we swung way too far the other direction. So I don't think there's enough time in the off season to build fundamental strength, foundational strength. I think a lot of guys are training straight line speed. Nobody's really changing change of direction, dynamic movement, which the game of football is all about. So now you get into training camp and you've got athletes who don't have the strength, don't have the ability to change direction. We're getting all these injuries. So now there's this hesitation to really commit to training camp. And we're not seeing the star players play enough to get ready to play the regular season because you're concerned about an injury. And you can't move through a season being worried about worst case scenarios. So I think you saw a lot of teams struggle. I think the game that we had, Tampa Bay, New Orleans, is a classic example where there were two different approaches. New Orleans went the way Dallas did. We're not going to play our starters a lot. They had some injuries, and you can understand that backing off. But you could see some of the timing issues that were there. You know, Drew and Michael Thomas were fine, but everybody else, those new guys in that passing game, they were a little bit out of sync. The defensive line was a little bit out of sync. Tampa Bay had done it differently this year. They saw Jacksonville last year in training camp, and they saw them with Doug Marrone and Tom Coughlin do an old school physical training camp. The players were complaining about it during the course of training camp, but they weren't complaining in January when they're in the AFC Championship game. So Dirk Cutter and his staff went a little bit more physical this year. They played to late whistles. They had a lot of contact. I think that showed itself in the game against New Orleans.
You know, the Cowboys have such a new set of receivers that Dak has never worked with. Given the lack of work at game speed in August, how long does it take to build a chemistry in the passing game with Dak and with Gallup and with Hearns and with Jeff Swaim and all these new pieces?
I think it takes a long time. I really do. And it was one of the things we talked to Drew Brees about this past weekend, because when you hear all this discussion about this playbook and how do these young guys do it, you know, walking into something that Sean Payton, Pete Carmichael, and Drew Brees have been doing for over a decade, and they've got to come in and hit it. And he said it's like math. Right? We got some guys that are ready to do algebra. We got other guys that are ready to do calculus. Right now, the Cowboys, their approach, they got a lot of guys that are ready for algebra. I don't think anybody's ready for calculus in that passing game right now. So I think it definitely is going to be something that's going to take a while. And we're talking the opportunity in training camp at game speed, and coaches will always talk about, yeah, they didn't get game reps, but boy, we did a lot of work, you know, at practices, and we really worked on that timing. That doesn't exist. You can't get game speed until you play games. So there'll be a 3-4 week adjustment. You know, a lot of teams talk about those first 4 weeks there's a lot of growth. Well, there's a lot of growth because you didn't really commit to it in training camp.
Yeah. Everybody talks about the Cowboys not having Des Bryant, not having Jason Witten, which is true, but they passed for under 200 yards. That was the 7th time in the last 9 games, and they did have Jason Witten and they did have Des Bryant last year. This seems to be a problem with this offense, and not just since they've lost Jason Witten and Des Bryant. Can you win consistently if you pass for under 200 yards? We're not even talking about 300 yards, but under 200 yards.
I think you can, but it has to be a complementary component. If you go back and you look at some of Troy's statistics, you know, he was a little bit under, a little bit over 200, but we were running the football while we were controlling the flow of the game. If Dallas is not doing that with Ezekiel Elliott and that offensive line, then I think that becomes an issue. Then I think the passing game does become something that has to kind of lift up that offense. If you're a franchise that's built around establishing the run, controlling the flow of the game, you have to be able to do that from the very beginning of the game. And Dallas is going to face 8-man fronts. Everybody knows what they're trying to do. You've got to have the ability to soften them up. And we did this a lot with the Philadelphia Eagles back in the day. You know, Norv would literally walk into the meeting on Saturday night before the game, and he always had to make sure that Nate was on board with this. He goes, listen, we're going to be throwing the football here for the first quarter and a half. We're going to sprinkle in the run, but I need you guys ready for the 3rd quarter. For the 4th quarter, we're going to come back to the run. But we're not going to run the football into Reggie White and Jerome Brown and Clyde Simmons and Byron Evans. I mean, that was a very physical front that was very talented. You'd be banging your head against a brick wall. So that's one of the things that Dallas has to do. They've got to have that ability to run the ball and stay true to who they are and what their identity is. But these guys on the outside have to be able to take the pressure off. And if you're going to play an 8-man box, if you're going to play single high, then they have to be able to make plays down the field and soften that front up.
Yeah, the first 3 plays of the game where Elliott rushes inside, that's not going to work. And this week with the Giants, you don't want to go there either.
When we come back, we're going to have Daryl Moose Johnston talk about the Giants-Cowboys game this weekend.
Steve has again found himself in a bar not playing his game. What is he to do? Call all the local bars and scour Facebook and Instagram for bar posts? Is there an answer? Wait a minute. The bar down the street is showing Steve's game? And he can invite all his friends to meet him there? Now you don't have to wonder or hope that the bar you're walking into is playing the game you want to see. Choose the location, play in your game, and be on your way. No more wasted time. If it's not the greatest feeling to be surrounded by a sea of your team's colors, then the drink and meal specials from the Fan Out app will do it.
Welcome back to the franchise. I'm Charean Williams. This is Rick Goslin, and we're pleased to be joined by Daryl Moose Johnston. And in this segment, we're going to talk about the Cowboys game this week. Both teams lost, but they lost to really good teams. But one of these teams after this weekend is going to be 0-2. I know players and coaches hate the term must win, and we saw the Saints rebound from an 0-2 start last year. But how big is this game realistically with the threat of falling to 0-2 here?
Well, I think just for the psyche of the team and everything that's been a topic of conversation throughout the offseason, I think it's very important for them. And I don't do the must-win statement, but the one I use is you don't win a championship in September, but you sure can lose one in September. So this is one of those games that puts you behind the 8 ball. And talking with Rick, divisional game at home. I mean, there's so many things that make this a very, very important game for the Dallas Cowboys. Not only getting out to an 0-2 start if they lose, but you've just given up one of your home divisional games as well. So it'd be a double hit.
Well, will this game be a better test for this defense? Because the Giants, with Beckham, Shepard, Ingram, they can throw the ball better than Carolina. And with Barkley, looks like they can run the ball better than Carolina. This should be a better barometer for this defense, shouldn't it?
Yeah, I think you get a better feel. But that was one of the disappointing things about the Carolina game, because the one thing that really hurt them in the beginning of the game was something they should have been able to defend. So I'm anxious to see the secondary against this wide receiver group of the New York Giants, because that's one of the areas that I think is going to be exciting for the Cowboy teams or Cowboy fans. And this is a situation, and we had this throughout my career, my tenure with the Dallas Cowboys. There were certain times during the season where we would lean on the defense to kind of hold the ship together so the offense could kind of catch our stride. And then at other times, it was up to us. And even from week to week, I remember talking to Darren Woodson going into the Philadelphia game and say, hey, listen, you got to hold these guys to 17, 14. We're not going to score a lot of points. And then he would come to me before San Francisco and he'd be like, yeah, you guys got to be ready to put up 31 or 35 on these guys. So there's that complementary aspect that happens, and that's what's going to happen for the Dallas Cowboys right now. That defense is going to have to continue to hold teams to 16 like they did with Carolina, and hopefully this offense starts to make some plays, and all of a sudden you start to have a little bit of success.
How much better do these linebackers need to play? We've heard about Sean Lee and Jalen Smith and really expected big things from them, but I saw a lot of missed tackles out there from those two guys.
A lot of missed tackles. Sean talked about it after the game, and again, I think this gets back to what Rick was talking about, missed training camp time. Practice speed, your angles are this. Game speed, your angles are this. So out of position, just a step late, a step behind. So two people that we talked about that are very athletic, have a great football IQ, can kind of dissect what's happening, similar to a Luke Kuechly type guy. Let's see what the next step is this week. They always seem to be bounce back players. I'm anxious to see how this defense performs, because in the beginning of the game, there were some things there that shouldn't have happened. It was simple things that they were not executing correctly.
Last week, offensive line, Dak Prescott 6 sacks. Elliott rushed for under 70 yards. Is this a bounce back week potentially for this offensive line?
They got some big guys up front again.
Snacks.
Snacks is on the nose. So and it's a 3-4, and a 3-4 are all different rules. Yeah. So you're getting to see it a little bit more in the NFL today. So there's a little bit more familiarity with it, but you've got Joe Looney and Connor Williams, side by side, and those, you were a rookie left guard, and now with Travis out, you've got a backup in your center position. Like you said, why do you want to run into that? That's the one area you're not going to feel good. Let's get out to Lyle Collins. Let's get out to Tyron Smith. Let's get on the edge. Let's get the tight end packages out there. So if you're going to run the ball, let's kind of get out there on the edge. But this is going to be a tough day for him. I'm a big James Betcher fan. I think he really utilizes his personnel well. And this will be a 3-4 as a base front, but you're going to see a lot of different things. They're very, very multiple in what they do. So this will be a little bit of a mental challenge for Dallas, as well as just the physical component.
Well, you talked about the mental challenge. How much do they miss Frederick there making the pre-snap reads, pre-snap calls? Because it looked like Joe Looney blocked okay from what I've heard from out here at the Star. But how did he do on those reads?
One of the things that you heard a little bit about was the communication had to improve week 2. So, that's just one of those things that if you're not taking that mental rep, in the background, when you get pressed into service, how comfortable are you with that call? How firm are you with that call? That's something that definitely has to be addressed because, as we talked about, the Giants' defense will be multiple. There needs to be communication up and down that front, because it's going to change, and all of a sudden you could have an assignment change. And if you're not getting that across that 5, all of a sudden you're going to have a free rusher to your quarterback.
Were you surprised how little impact Tavon Austin, Michael Gallup, and Allen Hurns had? I
am. I watched Michael Gallup in June at OTAs. I think he has the potential to be a very good receiver this year. Tavon is a unique guy, but everything I've read and heard, people say he stepped up in a leadership role. He was a good example guy. So not just the speed and kind of the gadget impact, but it sounds like he really kind of grew with his craft this year in the offseason. So Allen Hurns is a guy that I'm familiar with from his time, in Jacksonville. So it's I was surprised to see the lack of production. But again, I think it comes down to what you said. There was just not enough time spent together with the quarterback in game situations. You can go out and do it out there. You can do it in training camp, but it's a completely different thing when it happens in the game. And just you're going to be a quarterback on the move, so you've got to. We're practicing things from the pocket where it's a perfect environment. What happens when all of a sudden Carolina or the Giants puts pressure on, the play breaks down, and now I'm moving? How comfortable are they understanding what the different scenarios are going to be once that play breaks down and the quarterback is on the move?
And they're gonna bring pressure.
Absolutely.
They're gonna bring pressure.
If you could pick one key to this game, what will it be?
I think coming out and understanding that you're going to have to step away from what your identity is once in a while and throw the ball and get that defense kind of back on its heels a little bit. Let them know that you can't just pin your ears back and come after us and try to stop the run. We're going to have some other things, even if it's something simple like just some screens and some draws, early on in the game. But don't come to a standard running game and try to blast yourself into the middle and try and secure the edge right away. It's not about running the football. It's about running the football effectively. And the way you do that is when a team is built to shut you down, and it's an area that you have. Don't bang your head against a brick wall too long. So I would love to see them come out and strike a little bit pass heavy play calling scenario during the first 2 or 3 series of the game, and maybe even all the way through that first quarter.
When we come back, we're going to talk to Moose Johnston about his GM duties.
My name's Adriana Morales. I'm with Axiom Backgrounds, and this is a full-service background screens and checks provider. We also do drug testing. What separates me from other companies is the fact that I have been an investigator for over 20 years. I was in asset protection, and I was a certified forensic interviewer. So what that means is that I have worked with the reporting for many years. I know where the information comes from, and I've worked for very large organizations who utilize these reports on a daily basis for our investigations. We customize our pricing based on your budget, but you're still getting the resources that big companies have. So working with me, you get a lot more for your money.
Welcome back to the franchise. We're here with Daryl Moose Johnston, and besides his Fox duties, you're busy.
Yeah.
He is now the general manager of the new Alliance of American Football franchise in San Antonio. Congratulations on that. And I know you spent a lot of time here with Will McClay and kind of picking some of their brains a little bit. How much did that help you in becoming a GM, just spending time out here with some of those guys? Yes,
it's been about 3.5, 4 years that this has kind of started, and it comes across with that old line: failure to plan is preparing, or is planning to fail. I could see the young guys that were coming out. You know, Tony Romo coming out. You know, Jason Witten had come out, but this was happening back 3.5 years ago. There was going to be this influx of players coming off the field and into the booth, and for a guy who's been there. Now this is my 19th year. You know, I'm kind of separated. There's a lot of distance between the fans watching today, recognizing me and understanding, you know, my connection to the league from back when I was a player. So it became time to kind of maybe look at something else, just to make sure that I was being smart. So I started this about 3.5 years ago, and you know, I've been up to visit with John Dorsey at Kansas City's camps the last couple of years. Gone to see Bill Parcells, gone to see Ron Wolf. You know, and then this past year, Will McClay and Alex Loomis were just fantastic. They let me come out and spend the whole time with them in the month of June with OTAs and mini camp, and that's actually kind of when the whole opportunity with the Alliance League came together. One of the guys who was in charge of hiring some of the business side was here in town for a wedding and was good friends with Will, and he came into the office while I was there, and we started talking about things, and it got pushed up the ladder, and it was something that they were able to convince Bill Polian to take a look at, and then Jerry and Stephen Jones were very influential on my behalf of kind of reaching out to Bill Polian and putting in a good word for me. So got the opportunity, and it's been awesome, you know, to kind of see the other side of the game of football. It's a whole new vocabulary that you have to learn. You know, as players in the back of the building, we talk one way. The front office people talk a completely different language. So I'm learning about bend and taps and all these different things and length. And so it's been fun. I've got 2 great guys that are working with me down in San Antonio. Bob Morris, who's right here in McKinney, who's been a long time scout in the NFL, coach for a number of years as well. So he's got it from a coach's perspective that also can see how the players play. They got that from Gil Brandt. Gil was awesome as soon as he found out. He really likes Bob, and Bob has been tremendous. And then John Peterson is a guy who was a scout for a long time in the Canadian Football League and here in the NFL, and he's down in San Antonio. So we've got kind of a guy with boots on the ground down in San Antonio. So it's been great learning from 2 guys that have been doing this for 25, 30 years. So it's a work in progress for me. Very excited about the opportunity. I think the city of San Antonio is excited as well. I think we actually have sold the most preseason tickets before the season starts. So yeah, we're excited. We kick off in February.
Now, the 2 poster boys for this transition are John Elway and John Lynch. Have you talked to either one of those 2 about going from player to boss?
I've talked to John Lynch. You know, John was a guy that was with us at Fox and got to know John. And actually this past summer, San Francisco was down practicing with Houston and then had a preseason game. And Houston is one of the franchises in the NFL that we're tied to in San Antonio. We have Dallas, Houston, Kansas City, and Philadelphia are 4 NFL teams that tie in with us to get us allocated players. And John was coming in, and we've got guys that are allocated to us from San Francisco as well. you know, if they were to be released. So just kind of sat down and with an opportunity to talk about personnel, but also the ins and outs, the day-to-day things, where are the boundaries as a general manager, you know, that you don't want to cross to offend the coaches, and you know, the consistency in your messaging, you know, some foundational principles that you believe in, and he had some great advice. So yeah, I continue to reach out, you know, hopefully reach out to Ozzie Newsome as well, and get his perspective. He's somebody that's been very well respected as an ex-player that has had success in building a team. So the one thing that the people I've talked to have said is, you know, just because you don't speak the language and maybe you get into a personnel meeting, you're gonna feel intimidated, but you know what good football looks like. You know, maybe you can't explain why, but you're gonna watch a player and know that player is good at what he does because you've seen it before. And it's actually been hard because, I mean, the guys I played with were some of the best ever. I've always struggled with it with Troy. You know, people are like, well, where does this quarterback rank? I'm like, he's not that good. You know, well, it's because I played with Troy Aikman, you know, my entire career. So the bar is set really hard for quarterback, for tight end, for wide receiver, for offensive line. I mean, the guys that I played with here in Dallas have made it difficult for me because that bar is set so high when you're going through your evaluations. You have to understand that you played with some unique players during your days, and that there's another level down there that's also a very good football player.
The most important thing for this league is to develop quarterbacks, I assume, because the league has a crying need for a place for young guys who aren't going to get snaps in an NFL camp to get that practice. How important will the quarterback position be in your mind as the GM of this franchise? It's
going to be huge. It's the most important position in the NFL. It's the most important position in college. It'll be the most important position for us. It's so much so that there's going to be a unique thing that we do to ensure that there's a little bit of equity with the quarterback position across the league. We understand how important that position is, and we've seen some other leagues all of a sudden end up with 2 or 3 of the best quarterbacks in that entire league on the same roster, and it doesn't make sense. So there's some things that we're going to have in place to make sure that we don't have that. But a developmental standpoint, you know, for a lot of guys, you know, if you haven't made it to the NFL, you're missing something. There's a trait that's not there from a physical standpoint. It could be something with the playbook. It could be something with your preparation, your strength and conditioning, your change of direction. You know, what is it that we can help you with? And one of the things that we've heard from a lot of the NFL coaches that we talk to is, you know, if he could just play the game. We just don't have the time to get him in the game. He just needs reps. You know, he'd be a good player. So they've all embraced this opportunity for guys that are in that position that, you know, I think he's a good player, but I just need to see him play more snaps in a game. They get a couple of snaps in preseason, they get put on the practice squad, and then they're just simulating plays the whole regular season. Then they get put on a futures contract, and they're just working out and doing some things around the facilities. So this will give an opportunity for that guy that NFL coaches feel like, you know, boy, we'd really like to see him in a game situation, to come down and hopefully we're able to establish a good working relationship with the NFL somewhere down the road.
And one of the things I liked in the USFL was the territorial. They had schools that were in the area, and you got NFL teams in the area. How will you benefit with the Cowboys, Houston, and a lot of the local Texas schools having local kids on the field for you?
I think it gives us a leg up on a lot of the teams that are out there. You know, people will look at they'll look at Birmingham, and Birmingham has Alabama and LSU, and people say, well, that's not really fair. You know, those are 2 dominant programs, you know, out of the SEC in the college ranks. The state of Texas, the players that we're getting, we don't have Texas Tech and we don't have El Paso, but we do have Oklahoma. Oklahoma dropped down to us. Oklahoma State goes to Phoenix. The thing that we are finding out right now is the UT San Antonio, Texas A&M, West Texas A&M, you know, these small, Stephen F. Austin, Abilene Christian, you know, Texas State, all your smaller D2 Texas schools are putting out good football players, and it gives us an opportunity there. I think we probably have the biggest allocation of smaller colleges than any of the other franchises, and I've had, you know, Bill Devaney and Tim Ruskell and Phil Savage, guys that were GMs in the NFL, come to me and say, you know, gosh, you have this great opportunity with all these little small schools in Texas that we just don't have. Even in Florida for Tim. Tim's the general manager in Orlando, and even there they don't have the access to the small schools. They've got good big schools, but we've got a great pool of players coming from these smaller schools here in the state of Texas.
Daryl Moose Johnston, thanks for joining us today on The Franchise. We appreciate it, and we'll be back next week with another edition of The Franchise.